Hello, everyone. If you are curious about what we do at diaVerge Diabetes and how we do it, or if you're wondering if diaVerge programs and memberships are the right fit for you, you are in the right place. We're excited to be with you today for this behind the scenes look at Allison Herschede and the different ways that she helps her clients improve their diabetes management and both really physical and mental health as a result. So there are plenty of surprises coming up. This video is part 1 of 2, so stick around to the very end and you'll learn about part 2 and how to access it. My name is Lisa Lanasa. I'm the founder of diaVerge Diabetes, and I'm thrilled to welcome Allison Herschede here today. So if you don't know Allison, or maybe you just recognize her name from some of the online groups, Allison is a registered nurse, a certified diabetes care and education specialist. She is author of Grit Pregnancies: How to Have a Healthy Pregnancy and Normal Blood Sugar Levels with Type 1 Diabetes. She is a person living with type 1 diabetes herself, and she has been an instrumental part of diaVerge Diabetes for the last 3+ years. So a huge welcome to Allison, and thank you for being here today to share a sneak peek at what you do.
Well, thank you for asking me.
Absolutely. I think this is really one thing that people don't understand. Like, what do you actually do? So we are here to, like I said, kind of pull back the curtain, show behind the scenes sneak peek, and raise some awareness about what happens here at diaVerge. So first of all, I think one thing that's so important is your background with type 1 diabetes personally. Would you share a little bit about that and your experience?
Absolutely. So I've been a type 1 diabetic basically my whole life. I was diagnosed at 18 months old. So I just had my 42nd anniversary last month.
Congratulations.
And thank you. I was raised with the standard, ADA guidelines.
Yeah.
At the beginning, it was the exchange diet, which thankfully is no longer in place. I don't know, maybe not thankfully. Old school insulins. I started on pork and moved over to regular and NPH when human insulin was released, and had, okay blood sugar control. I was always told it was pretty good. My A1C was less than 8. And as I got into my teens, I started to lose control. I became more rebellious and wanted to eat what everyone else was eating and, slack on checking my blood sugars, things like that. And I told people my 19th year, I went a year without checking my blood sugar. I was alive only because of basal insulin, and I was living on rice and ramen noodles. And I'm super lucky that I have no complications as a result of that. So a year later, when I was 20, I was put on an insulin pump for the first time, and that completely changed my life. It was amazing. It was like, oh my goodness, I've been let out of jail. I can eat whatever I want now. Because I've been restricted up to then. I'd always told, cookies and cakes and sugar, are poison for a diabetic. But now we have this rapid acting insulin. We have Humalog, and you have a pump, so you can eat whatever you want. You're just like anyone else. And oh man, that was amazing. So I'm eating whatever I want, and I put on 50+ pounds. And my blood sugars were okay again, maybe around 6-7% A1C, but I was already starting to see some complications. I had
how many years in was this for you approximately?
I would say I was seeing some complications as a teen, probably 15 years in.
Okay.
I had what they call tachycardia at rest, which is a rapid heart rate. It was always fast. It would be 120 beats a minute, even if I was completely calm. And it wouldn't change. There was no variation. So I know now that was a form of what they call autonomic neuropathy. It is damage to the vagus nerve, which controls your heart rate, your digestion, and that's the other part of it. I was starting to see signs of what they call gastroparesis, which is paralysis of the stomach, delayed stomach emptying. And I would have just no blood sugar patterns. I had a CDE look at my numbers and say, this looks like gastroparesis, because it would be low here and high here, and there was just no pattern anywhere. It was completely unpredictable. And then later that year, I had an incident where I vomited, and I vomited up rice I had eaten 12 hours prior. So at that point, it was like, okay, yeah. And thankfully, it didn't get to extreme levels like I've heard a lot of people, but it was definitely there. I had a lot of other symptoms that could be associated with vagus nerve damage, like a loss of your gag reflex. Who would ever think that's a sign of a complication? But your gag reflex is supposed to be there. It's a sign your vagus nerve is working. So that was something. And then at one point, I want to say around the time I got married in 2001, they found out what they called a spot of retinopathy in my eyes, which is when the blood vessels in the eyes start leaking because of high blood sugars doing damage to the retinas. So I was already starting to see the effects. I was overweight. I was 30 years old. I was taking 15 prescription medications at 30. I was on medications for high blood pressure, for high cholesterol, for depression, anxiety, for sleep. I was always on antibiotics. I had inhalers and nasal spray and you name it. I had a big old stack of medications I took every day. And I finally just kind of hit rock bottom and said, I've got to do something. And honestly, it wasn't even for diabetes. It was for weight loss. I had tried Atkins a couple times in the past and been successful with it. But I always had low blood sugar. Oh, there goes my Dexcom. Well, maybe I can demonstrate. And I am shot. So where was I?
So you were saying that you had tried Atkins and
I tried Atkins and I always had low blood sugar. And I thought, well, I just can't do low carb because my blood sugar goes low and then I have to eat carbs. So what's the point? Never once considering that I could lower my insulin because I thought I had to take the dose the doctor gave me. I thought that prescription was the amount my body needed and I had to take that amount. So it never once occurred to me that I could adjust my insulin. And so in 2010, right after my 30th birthday, I said, okay, I'm going to make this drastic life change. I'm going to go low carb. And I started, it was just a diet book called The Curbed Diet, which was low carb-ish. And right around this time, I found a fellow type 1, said, hey, go check out this website. This guy is such an idiot. This guy is claiming you can reverse diabetes with a low carb diet. And I go and I look at the website and I'm just enraged. Oh my goodness, this person he has no idea what he's talking about. You can't reverse diabetes with a low carb diet. So I go to my email and I email him. And this guy's name is Steve Cook, the diabetes warrior. And he has a website for type 2 diabetics. And he explained to me that this was for type 2 diabetics. He was not saying you could reverse type 1 diabetes with the low carb diet. But hey, have you ever considered the fact that your body doesn't metabolize carbohydrates? That this could actually be helpful in type 1? And I didn't want to hear that. My whole life I'd been restricted. I don't want to be restricted. I can eat whatever I want. But I was so desperate at that point. It was like, okay, maybe he's right. I guess that logically makes sense. I don't process carbohydrates. Maybe I shouldn't eat them. But I'd had doctors and CDEs warn me against low carb. You know, they said, oh, it will damage your kidneys. It will cause heart disease. Oh, your brain needs 150 grams of carbs a day to function. All those things are myths. All of them are not true. And so I started following this diet. And a month and a half in, I had only dropped about 5 pounds. And I was so frustrated and like, it's working, like, and Steve encouraged me to just keep going, keep trying, keep going. And at 10 months, I was down 55 pounds. I'd cut out all those medications, except for the insulin, of course, but I had cut the insulin dose in half because when I started having those low blood sugars, Steve says to me, Allison, lower your insulin. And it was like, oh, wow, light bulb, I can lower my insulin. So I ended up cutting in half. I went from about 50 units a day to 25 units a day. Total daily dose. And my blood sugars were better, but they weren't where I wanted them. I still would range an A1C in the 6 to 8 range. And I couldn't figure out why, because I was eating low carb. And everybody in the low carb Facebook groups would say, oh, eat more fat, eat more fat. You're not eating enough fat. So I was increasing the fat and increasing the fat. And at one point I was up to 90% fat. I was literally eating cream cheese pancakes, mozzarella balls marinated in olive oil, and bulletproof coffee, which is coffee with coconut oil and butter melted in. So I was about drinking 500 calories a day of fat for breakfast, and couldn't figure out why I was gaining weight. Blood sugars were out of control. A1C was up to 8. And I'd heard of Dr. Bernstein. He even mentioned Dr. Bernstein. I was even in the Dr. Bernstein group, and I'd kind of skimmed through the book, but it's a big book. Right. And I thought I was following Bernstein because I was low carb, but I was not following Bernstein. It is so much more than the diet. The diet is the foundation, absolutely. The food is big. It's a variable that we can control when so many others we can't. But it wasn't just the food. So once I actually read the book, I discovered what I was missing. I was missing things like bolusing for protein. No one ever teaches you. No CDE, no endocrinologist tells you that you need to bolus for protein. I was not correcting blood sugar to target. Like, I had been taught if blood sugar is over 200, take 1 unit. If it's over 250, take 2 units, whatever. And I might have, when I was pregnant, lowered my target and corrected it maybe 140. But it never occurred to me to correct at 120. That sounded ridiculous. Like, are you crazy correcting at 120? 120 is a good blood sugar. Well, 120 is not a good blood sugar according to Dr. Bernstein. And I learned that if I knew how much 1 unit of insulin lowered my blood sugar, I could safely correct a 120 to my target of 83. And if I knew how much 1 gram of glucose raised my blood sugar, I could safely correct a low blood sugar to my target without overcorrecting. Because prior to that, I would treat a low blood sugar with whatever I had on hand. If it was a cookie or a muffin or a bowl of cereal or 2 or 3, I would eat the whole fridge. I know everyone's heard that joke. Oh, I eat the whole fridge when I'm low. Well, I wasn't using glucose to correct lows. And that's another thing that Dr. Bernstein teaches, to correct your low blood sugars with glucose only. And nobody wants to do that because glucose tabs are nasty and they taste like chalk and but I've kind of changed my mind on that. I like the fact that they don't taste good. I treat them as a medicine because treating a low shouldn't be a fun treat. Treating a low should be medication because it's a medical condition. So my go-to now is liquid glucose. I have any right here. I actually don't have any on my desk. I'll have to pull some out later. Oh, here's one. Glucose shot. So I split them up into 5 grams each, and I treat a low with 5 grams now. So I'm actually treating a little bit higher than 83. I might treat from 70 to 95 because I know that 1 gram raises me 5. So 5 grams will raise me 25. So I have my high alert set to 120. I have my low alert set to 70. So if I hit 120, I know I need 0.4 units of insulin. And I know if I hit 70, I need 5 grams of insulin. And it's just, at this point, troubleshooting.
There's a system.
Exactly. So this was 2014. And I actually just had the memory in my Facebook 9 years ago. I had my first A1C of less than 5. That was my goal, sub 5. I got down to 4.9. And I've pretty much maintained that for the last 9 years. I've been high 4s to low 5s. So 2014, I met some people in the Bernstein group, and the 4 of us created a group called Type 1 Grit. This is Artie Dykeman, Debbie Wright Terrio, and Derek Rollerson. We started a group called Type 1 Grit, and I had always wanted to be a nurse ever since I was a little kid. Actually, I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor, but I was taught, oh, Allison, your health would never support being a doctor. You couldn't handle medical school. You couldn't handle the long hours. And I couldn't. They were right. So I'd always wanted to be a nurse. But at this point, I'm thinking maybe I want to be a CDE, a certified diabetes educator. Then I could, teach everyone about Bernstein because I'd been shouting it from the rooftops. I was driving my family crazy, posting on Facebook about low carb and blood sugars and diabetes all the time. And like my husband unfollowed me, I think. And like my family members were annoyed. My friends were annoyed. Everybody was seeing my food pictures constantly. So I made a separate account for my diabetes and low carb. And I said, you know what? I need some letters behind my name. I need some credibility. So I'm not just some girl on Facebook saying you should eat low carb. Mm-hmm. So I started nursing school in 2014. I graduated with my associate's degree in 2016. I knew that I needed 2 years of working in the field to get my CDE. And I knew that a 2-year nursing degree was my fastest route, because if I were to go with dietitian, that would take 5 years. If I were to go with pharmacist, it would take longer than that. If I was, physical therapist, occupational therapist, all those other possibilities, they take longer. So nursing is the fastest route. So I have my associate's degree. I'm working in the hospital, working on my bachelor's degree, and getting my hours in. You have to have 1,000 hours of diabetes self-management education. Thankfully, I very, very luckily was hired at a pediatric endocrine clinic as an RN diabetes educator with the stipulation that I would get my CDE within 6 months. Mm-hmm. So that really allowed me to get the rest of those hours I needed. So I'm working in this field and I love it. This is awesome. This is amazing. I'm helping people, but I'm forced to teach things that I know are wrong. Mm-hmm. I had to teach the rule of 15. We've all been taught, oh, you have a low blood sugar, you treat with 15 grams of carbohydrate, you wait 15 minutes, and if your blood sugar hasn't come up, you take another 15 grams. Well, that can result in some very high blood sugars, especially in children. I had a little girl the other day, her blood sugars, 1 gram of glucose raises are 30. So if they treat her with 15 grams of carbohydrate, she's going to spike hundreds of points. And this is what we see. We see these children spiking through the roof, and then we correct when they get above 200, and then they're low again. And it's a roller coaster all day long of treating highs and lows. So I was having to teach that. I was having to teach a lot of things that I knew at the time were wrong, but I was forced to teach them. I was actually allowed to teach low carb to the type 2 kids, which was better than some places. But the type 1 kids, I couldn't teach them low carb because they need carbs to grow. They need carbs for brain function, but apparently the type 2 kids don't. So finally, I'm getting really frustrated with my job because an RN diabetic educator is an RN and a diabetic educator. It wasn't just a title, it was 2 jobs. They were literally having me work as an RN in the clinic and then going to the hospital and educating my newly diagnosed type 1s. And if I couldn't get to them in time, I was expected to stay late past my shift, and I was salaried. So this was hours and hours. I'm just like frustrated and tired. And my husband says to me, Allison, just quit your job and write your book. So I quit my job and started writing the book. And then I discovered it takes a lot longer to write a book than I thought. I thought 6 months would be plenty. Now it ended up being more like a year and a half. So about 6 months in, you contacted me December of 2019 and asked me to join diaVerge. And now I've been here in the dream job ever since. And that was a long story.
Fantastic story. Thank you. No, I think it's so important for us as type 1s to share our experiences because, this hasn't always come naturally to us. It's not like, oh yeah, I found this way of eating and management and I've never had to make any, changes. And, that's not real life for most people. So we still have things that we're working on, and we are real people living with type 1 ourselves and, doing these day-to-day adjustments just like everybody else is. So your story is incredibly valuable. Let's get into talking a little bit about your work with clients. How does it start off? Or if somebody says, hey, I want to start working with you, or, what does working with you look like? What happens then?
So I'll have them schedule a 30-minute consultation. So you sign up with a link. fill out a little information about yourself, your history of diabetes, what kind of medications you're taking, things like that. And we'll just have a talk, a getting to know you session, where I usually just have people tell their story. Like, everybody's got a story, and usually things, even if you filled this out in your profile, there's going to be things we missed. So I'll just have you tell me about yourself, what you're struggling with, what your goals are with coaching. Why are you here? What are you looking to do? Are you looking to lower your A1C? Are you looking to lower your standard deviation? Like, what's your goal here? And at this point, we'll talk about, do you have other health conditions? Do you take other medications? What do you eat normally? Are you already eating low carb, or are you brand new starting this? And at this point, I'll decide whether I think, one, is coaching a good fit for you? Two, would you be better suited for our diabetes redesign class, which can be quite helpful if you're new to this, or even if you just need a brush up on Bernstein's protocols, or if we want to just go straight to one-to-one coaching.
Great. And then you would follow up afterwards with?
I send them an email with all the information about how to sign up, and they can, write me back and ask questions if we haven't covered something. I usually will go over what I need from them for a call. I always ask people for food logs, which everyone hates. I hate food logs. I don't like writing food, but they're incredibly helpful. So I'm looking for food, blood sugars, insulin, resulting blood sugars. And don't just write down the good ones, write down everything. The more data, the better. So write down if kid goes to a sleepover or has a performance or went swimming. If you had a low, you had to correct it to in the morning. Note that. The more data, the better. So I'll have you do these logs, and SugarMate is the preferred method, but you can do handwritten logs. You can use Chronometer. You can use, what's the other one? We've used Tidepool a couple times. People using a Freestyle Libre can actually make notes in the Libre View app, so they can make notes of their food. So it's really just what works for you. One lady would just send me an email, say, this is what I ate, these were my blood sugars. That works too. Or Google spreadsheets. I'm pretty flexible. So I'll have them do that, and then I'll also have them share their CGNs, so their Libre or their Dexcom. And so before the call, I will download their reports. I'll print them out. I'll circle any highs and lows. I'll look for patterns. Then I'll cross-reference it to their SugarMate or their food logs. So I can look at it. So the point of the food log is not so I can say, no, he ate something on the no-no list. Right. No, that's not the point. This isn't so I can judge your food choices. It's so I can say, could that be bolus related? Could that be a protein rise I'm seeing? Could that be a rise from fat eaten late at night? Or is this basal? So once I can cross-reference the Dexcom or the Libre or even Medtronic to the food logs, the picture becomes a lot more clear. So I'll tell them about that and answer any questions they might have.
So it's really interactive. It's not just one-sided. There is work for the person who is, coming into the program or coming into coaching, but then you do a lot of background information, or you dig through all of this background information that they provide to be able to find these trends and be able to help them create more steady blood sugar levels.
Yes. And I've discovered reading Dexcom graphs is its own language. But even that is not enough information, because this is a story from the other day. I had a client who, looking at her graphs, you would say overnight basal is too high. And that's what her doctor said. Her doctor said, lower your basal. But once I looked at her SugarMate, I could see every night at 11 o'clock, she was taking a dose of regular insulin. It was dropping her overnight. But if I hadn't had that SugarMate, I wouldn't have known that. She probably wouldn't have thought to tell me. And we would have said, lower your basal, and that would have made the problem even worse. So those things are just completely invaluable.
And this is a lot of the work that many times doctors just don't have time, don't have the resources to be able to go this in depth with people. So this is not to be taken as a replacement for seeing your medical professional. This is to be used with your medical professional to be able to really dial in insulin doses and dial in your food and kind of supplement the doctor's recommendations, no?
Absolutely.
So now let's see, you talked a little bit about what you would do before the video calls, what happens, you go through all of the data that the client provides. So then during your calls, first of all, I should say with your one-to-one work, when you're working with a client, you have 2 video calls per month. It's a monthly subscription and you have 2 video calls per month and then unlimited chat between that time. But can you tell us a little bit about what happens during those video calls?
So we'll review those things I just talked about. I will share my screen and we'll go over your Dexcom graphs, and then we'll switch over to SugarMate or your logs. And I will point out things that I've seen. I've got a name. So I drew arrows over where I spotted a pattern. So I circled the highs and lows, and then I'm looking for a pattern. So we can see every night we're going up overnight, and then we're correcting that high and going low. So I can see they're overcorrecting the high. And then they're rising. And I have some others that show that even more. They go low, they go high. So I can tell they're overcorrecting their lows and their highs, which causes a little roller coaster effect. So what I can see during the day is we're going up, morning rise, we're going up with breakfast, and we're going up with dinner. So this is a bolus issue here. This here is probably a basal issue because they're rising so late at night. This is 2 in the morning rising, 3 in the morning rising. So we probably need to increase the basal there. And then we need to test sensitivity to insulin so we can correct more precisely and not cause those lows by the corrections. And also test how much the glucose raises blood sugar so we're not overcorrecting the lows.
And that corrections are such an important part of it too. So
Yes.
we have food choices, we have insulin doses, timing, types of insulin that people are using, but then the corrections that people are making are so important because they can either make or break a straight line.
Yes, this is not hands off. This is not set it and forget it. A lot of people see the flat lines posted on social media and they think, oh wow, they're eating low carb and their blood sugars are beautiful. No, this is a result of corrections. Most of the time, some days you don't have to do anything. Some days are beautiful. Other days, like today, I'm correcting. Small corrections.
And when you see those lines online, a lot of work has gone into getting there. It's not like people just change the way they ate and everything is fantastic. You know, there's a lot of work to get in and problem solve and figure it all out.
Testing meals, that can take a long time. Figuring out how much insulin you need for a meal, because we were all taught insulin to carb ratio, and it doesn't matter if it's a candy bar or a piece of bread or an apple, they're all the same, and you just use your ratio. If you go high, well, you must have just underestimated your carbs, or your ratio must be off. But no, all carbs aren't equal. So we have to test meals. Trial and error, that's no fun. Nobody wants to hear trial and error. That Bernstein, that's one of his key phrases. It's all trial and error. So we test meals, we find the proper doses until we have the perfect dose nailed down for a meal. Then we find another meal.
But having an expert like you review all of this information, you see hundreds of graphs. You see, you know, you've worked with so many different people, both adults and children, people that have been diagnosed for 50 years and people who are newly diagnosed. So having somebody to be able to take a fine-tooth comb to all of this information is really important because you'll be able to see things that other people might just be learning. Now, talking about that, what are kind of some of the common trends that you see with adults? Like, is there anything that you can say, oh, you know, a broad generalization maybe, but but many adults have issues with this.
A lot of adults, most adults are taking too much basal. So for one of the first things we do is a basal test, a fasting basal test overnight starting. And what I'm almost always, I will see is a person drops overnight. And they're shocked when they drop because they think they probably actually needed more because they're having all these high blood sugars. In actuality, their basal set too high. When their endo saw they're running some high blood sugars, they just elevated the basal. And basal insulin should cover the fasting state. It should have nothing to do with food. So if you see you're dropping when you miss a meal, your basal insulin is probably too high. So yeah, that's one thing I see very commonly. Another one I would say is not covering protein properly. And that's a really tough one because again, there's no rule, there's no algorithm. A lot of people will say, oh, just take your protein grams and cut them in half and bolus them as carbs. No, you can't do that. That doesn't work across the board because seafood needs less insulin than chicken, and beef needs more insulin than turkey, and pork needs more insulin than eggs. So there's no algorithm. So a lot of times I'll see a rise overnight and it's almost always from protein and fat. And that's another thing, fat affects our blood sugar. And that's one that even Dr. Bernstein has only come to recently, because in his book, he says fat has no effect on blood sugar. It does. It's just very delayed, like 12 hours later. So when I was guzzling that bulletproof coffee, I might see a rise 12 hours later and it never once associated with what I was having for breakfast. So that's another thing. When I start to see rises overnight, even late at night, it's often because they had Rebel ice cream or yogurt or something as their bedtime snack, or even cheese. Oh, cheese is a freebie. No, nothing's free.
And that happens a lot in kids too, correct?
Absolutely.
Would you say
kids, I tend to see more rises overnight. They tend to need more insulin overnight, whereas adults tend to need less insulin overnight. I see a difference between LADAs, which is adult onset type 1. I tend to see a difference in their insulin needs as opposed to a type 1 who was diagnosed as a child, or even an adult who was diagnosed type 1. It wasn't a slow onset. It was just an immediate, you're type 1. They tend to need less basal insulin and more bolus insulin.
So they're more carb sensitive.
Very carb sensitive, yes. And even more insulin resistant, I would say. They need more bolus insulin for correction, for instance.
Yeah.
So all these things I've just discovered working with people over the years.
Oh, this is amazing though. So then when you're working with somebody, so you have one of these video calls, what would happen after the call or between the calls?
So after the call, I will write up a care plan going over everything we've discussed. So I'll outline what we discussed, I'll go into detail, and then I'll have supporting documents going over what we talked about. So if I suggested you test your basal, I'll have instructions for basal testing. If I suggest you test your sensitivity, I'll have instructions for sensitivity testing. You know, things to back up, to reinforce what we talked about, how to treat low blood sugars with glucose, what you can use, how much you should be taking. If you haven't tested yet, you can use Dr. Bernstein's chart, things like that. And in between calls, we offer chat support. So Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Central Time, you can message me as much as you need to. And I encourage people to message me because the people who are messaging me are getting the results. A lot of people say, oh, I don't want to bother you. Like, no, that's what you're paying for. You're paying for me to help you. So I will have some people who will literally send me a sugar mate report every single day. Those are the people who see results because we can troubleshoot daily. We can work on these meals. So it's not a big surprise or it's not a secret. We can each day go over the previous day and make changes. So 2 calls a month and then chat support in between.
Yeah. I think it's really important that you just pointed out the chat support because it's not just the 2 calls. The 2 calls are a great way to be able to go over everything face to face and really dig a little bit deeper. But all of that more moment to moment or day to day sort of management happens with the chat support. That's amazing. Now, I know you go so much beyond this, though. It's not just about digging through food logs and CGM logs in order to optimize blood sugar levels. So you really provide more of almost a concierge service for people. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've helped some of our clients with recently?
Yeah. So I can actually help with prior authorizations, for example. I had a client who didn't have a Dexcom. We wanted to get her on a Dexcom as soon as possible, and her doctor was just kind of taking his time. So I said, you know what, I'll write the prior authorization and he can just sign it.
Mhm.
So I added all the pertinent data, nighttime hypoglycemia unawareness. We're swinging between 40 and 400, things like that. And then all their doctor had to do was sign it. I've helped people get new insulin. If I had one client who was still on MPH, which is a old school insulin that's available over the counter, that it can be quite problematic. And I will go into the client's insurance formulary and I'll find out which insulin their insurance will cover. So they can ask their doctor for that prescription. Or if their insurance doesn't cover it, they can get a prior authorization. Or if they can't afford their insulin, I can help them find the savings plan, because every single insulin manufacturer has a savings plan in place. Dexcom has a savings plan in place, so I can help you with the Dexcom coupons, with prescription help. I can't think what else.
School plans?
School plans, yeah. Writing the 504, writing the diabetes management plan. I can help you with ideas with that. Obviously, we're going to have to get your doctor on board to sign off on these things, but I can definitely help you write up the plan and present it to your doctor.
And even, I know in some of our small groups, we've been talking about creating lists for people to be prepared when they see their doctor too.
Yes. So,
and that's something you help with
labs
as
that you
well.
want to have run, things that you have of concern, prescriptions, because you always forget, you only get 15 minutes with the doctor, and then the doctor comes in and your mind goes blank. So I've learned to walk in with a laundry list. I want these labs, I want these prescriptions, these are my concerns, and they're highlighted.
Right. So it's really, it's a lot of kind of being the intermediary between the medical support at the doctor's office and the client in many cases, and helping advocate for the client's needs.
And if your doctor's not supportive, we can help find you a doctor who is supportive. Sometimes we can't, but oftentimes there are doctors that we can find and we can point you towards. They're maybe an hour or two drive away, and for me, that's worth it. I'll drive an hour away to have a supportive doctor.
And have somebody who's maybe vetted and recommended by other members. So that's very important.
And then we also offer lab tests. So when the doctor says, no, I won't check that for T3, or no, I won't check that C-peptide, we can run that test for you.
Note that has to be in the United States, and it
has to be in the United States, no under 18, and not valid in New York, New Jersey, and Rhode Island. I did check Arizona, and it is legal now.
Ah, fantastic. All right. But you do also work with people internationally.
I do. Yeah. I work with people all over the world. I'm licensed in, I think it's 34 states at this point. So if I'm not licensed in your state or your country, then I can't give you precise insulin dosing instructions. I will have to be more vague. I have to say you might consider lowering your basal insulin, or some people have found it helpful to increase blah, 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 or I found it helpful to do this. But to be clear, I'm not going to say I would take 1.5 units. I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to give you an exact number. So I'll give you advice, but I can't give you precise instructions if I'm not licensed for you.
More of a consultant in those areas. Wow, we have covered a lot of ground here, and I know there must be other things that you're I'm trying to think of just some of our groups about other things that you've helped people with. And I know it's been just incredible in some cases, helping people get ready for their type 1 kids to go to school, and getting all supplies needed, and helping people find resources for syringes and liquid glucose, and even helping people find grocery stores or certain products in grocery stores or certain
Oh, I'll do that
supplements.
too. I'll go to store
Mhm.
finders and type in your zip code and find you where you can buy those products.
So I think that is so helpful. And knowing that you're a real person and you deal with this personally yourself is so valuable. Now, let's see, anything else that you want to add, Allison? I think this has just been incredible to see, or to learn more about what you do, to learn more about you personally, and to get this view behind the curtain that most people don't see unless they work with you. Anything else you want to add?
I think we've pretty well covered it.
Awesome. So there's a lot more to our CGM graphs and our data analysis that we haven't covered yet. And so how can we understand what our data is telling us, and how can we potentially adjust based on our data trends? That is going to be part 2 of this series. So we will be recording part 2 shortly. And as someone who has watched this entire seminar, thank you so much for staying with us. You will automatically be emailed the link for the part 2 when it is ready.
That always makes the morning rise horrible when my schedule is different.
That is early, but
My
everybody
body is railing up like, no.
everybody everybody get to where they needed to go. Okay. And
Yes. Which is the latent adult onset diabetes. I can't talk today.
that's so important that you pointed out the chat support, because it's not just the 2 months or the 2. Okay. Learning about what our CGF and all about decoding your data, what our CGM means. Oh my gosh. So look who can't talk now. So I am I'm tired. I'm warm.
We're going to have some good spoof outtakes.
Take 4. Oh yeah, I should do that. That'll be funny as I'm like mopping the sweat off of my face and stuff.